Hi, Josh. How are you?
Ahmed Mansour is a human rights activist in the United Arab Emirates. I interviewed him 2 years ago, shortly after he had received strange text messages with suspicious links.
The text was talking about some secrets related to the torture in the United Arab Emirates. They tailored that message for me to click on the link.
The UAE had bought a powerful spyware called Pegasus. It can break into almost any smartphone once a target opens an attached link.
The bottom line to the government here is to monitor activists and certain individuals of interest to them.
Mansour is now serving a 10-year prison sentence in the UAE for publicly criticizing his government.
It could not only land people in jail, but it could also cause some people to be killed or, assassinated.
His case was the first detected hack of its kind. In the last 4 years, Pegasus has been used against activists and journalists around the world. In this episode of Fault Lines, we investigate how governments are using Pegasus to turn their critics' cell phones into the ultimate tools of surveillance. In 2015, Pegasus showed up in Mexico. Among the 24 targets was Mexico's most famous investigative journalist, Carmen Aristegui. She and her team had just revealed a major corruption scandal involving the president at the time, Enrique Peña Nieto. The story shocked the nation, and soon Aristegui felt the backlash.
El gobierno de Enrique Peña Nieto desató una persecución en mi contra y mi interpretación es que querían dañarme de diferentes maneras.
2 months after the revelations, Aristegui and her teenage son started getting strange text messages with enticing links.
Eran decenas de mensajes, mensajes que no podías no abrir, mensajes que aludían a tu familia, al lugar donde vives. Entonces yo pregunté a alguien que qué tipo de cosa era eso y me decían, bueno, debe ser un malware. La recomendación es que no los abran más, pero seguramente abrimos varios. Imagínate lo que tiene mi teléfono. Mis fuentes, las fuentes de mis compañeros periodistas, pues estaban aterradas.
Cybersecurity researchers in Canada determined that Aristegui and her son Emilio had been targeted with Pegasus. At the time, Emilio was a 16-year-old high school student studying in the U.S.
Por supuesto que te sacude, te indigna, te enoja, porque es meterse con un adolescente que no tendría por qué estar involucrado. No es que justifique que espíen a los adultos, pero hay una gravedad mayor cuando se utiliza desde el Estado una herramienta intrusiva, una herramienta muy poderosa para saber todo lo que hace, piensa e involucra a un adolescente. La historia de mi hijo, creo, está asociada a querer utilizar algo malo para dañarme a mí.
To find out more about the use of Pegasus in Mexico, we came to R3D, a digital rights group that has helped shed light on the cyber attacks here. How many Pegasus infections have you found in Mexico?
We know that at least 30 people have been targeted, and those were human rights defenders, journalists, politicians, even international investigators. What we know from the contract that has been made public is that Mexico acquired the ability to infect 500 targets. So we know that there probably were many more targets.
Pegasus is the creation of an Israeli spyware company called NSO Group. The Mexican Attorney General's office recently disclosed its contracts with NSO Group from 2016 and 2017. They show the office had paid at least $32 million for Pegasus.
Have you seen anything like this when it comes to surveillance on this scale?
We have seen other types of malware, We have seen some cases here and there. We haven't seen this scale of abuse with a malware tool as powerful as this one.
One of the things that makes Pegasus so powerful is that it can access information on a phone before it can be encrypted. Encryption protects a user's privacy by securing the data on a device.
Lots of authorities, for legitimate and illegitimate purposes, want to be able to crack that encryption by looking at the devices before that information is encrypted in the first place. Pegasus takes total control of the phone. It can get access to pictures, chats, the contact list. It can open the mic, open the camera without you noticing. It records everything you type.
NSO Group says it only contracts with governments and law enforcement agencies to fight criminals and terrorists, and that their technology has helped thwart terror attacks and save thousands of lives. But they won't say how.
You know, some of the people that seem targeted, clearly they're not suspects. Why would they target them?
The government was trying to silence them. It was trying to make them not resist authoritarian acts, human rights violations, corruption, lies. And when a target is particularly difficult to target, they go to your immediate circle. So in a way, it's an attack on all society.
NSO Group says that it can remotely cut off a client's access to Pegasus if they abuse it. But more hacks were reported in Mexico after the Pegasus scandal blew up here. In 2017, in the state of Sinaloa, home to one of Mexico's most powerful drug cartels, Javier Valdez was gunned down just blocks from his office. He was a reporter famous for his unflinching coverage of narco violence here.
Bueno, es una fecha de la que obviamente a 2 años una no puede recuperarse.
Griselda Triana is the widow of Valdez. She's a journalist and activist in Sinaloa.
Mis compañeras me trasladan hasta el lugar y cuando llego efectivamente pues ya veo que están las cintas amarillas y el cuerpo de Javier tirado sobre la calle. No se preocupe.
Just days after the shooting, Triana got strange text messages that included links.
PGR asegura que el móvil del asesinato de Javier Valdez fue para robarle su automóvil. Este mensaje me llegó, 10 días después de que mataron a Javier.
And the link here is bit.ly, bit.ly. So that's hiding what the actual link this is sent to. And this is so specific to you.
Yo no entiendo por qué lo hicieron. Yo a las autoridades, a la PGR, a la Comisión Nacional de Seguridad, la Policía Científica, yo les permití el acceso a mi casa y a los aparatos que ellos querían verificar. Entonces me sentí violada.
Two of Valdez's colleagues at the Sinaloa-based newspaper Rio Doce also received Pegasus-infected links within days of the murder. Andres Villarreal was one of them.
Why do you think you were targeted?
Pensamos que el gobierno tenía mucha prisa por resolver el caso de Javier por la atención mediática que tuvo el caso. Si alguien tenía información de lo que estaba trabajando, lo que estaba ocurriendo alrededor de Javier, éramos nosotros, su familia o sus más cercanos colaboradores y amigos además, y que por eso optaron por escuchar nuestras llamadas para saber qué estábamos diciendo inmediatamente después del asesinato de Javier.
Why would they need to secretly and illegally surveil your phones? Is the implication that they think you didn't tell them the truth or you're holding something back?
A veces la autoridad de México hace muchas cosas que aparentemente son inexplicables, ¿no? Que no forman parte de una investigación correcta, digamos, ¿no? Era tan simple quizás de interrogarnos o de preguntarnos qué es lo que estaba ocurriendo. Los acercamientos nuestros con la autoridad pasaron muchos días después del asesinato de Javier, no fueron inmediatos.
Who do you worry about more, the authorities or the narcos?
A veces son uno solo. No hay la frontera entre autoridad y delincuencia es muy débil. ¿Quién da más miedo? Pues yo creo que cualquiera de los dos. En México hay que cuidarse de ambos.
2 men were arrested a year after the murder, but the mastermind was never apprehended. 99% of crimes against journalists go unpunished in Mexico. It's unknown if Valdez got similar messages before his death. His killers took his phone and laptop.
Do you think your phone is tapped now?
Yo sé que mi nuevo aparato no está infectado, pero de todas maneras queda esa sensación de sentirme observada.
In 2017, under pressure from the public, the Mexican Attorney General's office launched a criminal investigation into the hacking of journalists and activists. This is the same agency that bought Pegasus. So far, no one has been held accountable. Earlier this year, the Mexican government claimed that it no longer uses Pegasus. The first people to discover what Pegasus is and does were researchers at Citizen Lab, a digital rights group at the University of Toronto. They investigate abuses of Pegasus worldwide.
One of the biggest selling points of this stuff is that it's wickedly hard to find. There's a cat and mouse game. They hide, we seek.
They were able to associate the links that were sent to Mansour, Aristegui and her son, Triana, and many others with NSO Group servers.
The first time that we learned about Pegasus, Ahmed Mansour gets in touch and says, listen, I think I'm being targeted again.
What was special about it? What was different?
Well, this one caught our attention in part because it was about his mobile phone. Hacking an iPhone is a much larger technical lift, and we realized that we were looking at a chain of iPhone 0 days. So these are vulnerabilities that even Apple didn't know about at the time that could be used to remotely infect and penetrate that device and implant a piece of malware on it. And people, if they really find the messages...
Scott Railton and his colleague Bill Marchek have investigated abuses of Pegasus since 2016. They've identified Pegasus infections in the network space of at least 45 countries.
UK, UAE, Yemen, Jordan, Libya, Kuwait.
No country has more reported cases of abuse than Mexico.
What we can see here is the approximate locations of IP addresses of infected devices. The thing is, we don't know how many devices are within any of these networks. It could be 1, it could be 10.
Outside of Mexico, Pegasus has been implicated in other high-profile cases. The New York Times reported that it was used against the Emir of Qatar in 2014. And then in 2017, the ex-president of Panama was arrested for using it against political rivals.
There's a gold rush of investment into this industry, and many countries are like, you know what? After these Snowden revelations, I've seen this technology. I've seen what it can do. Why don't we have some?
In all these cases that we looked at, how confident are you that it was Pegasus and it was NSO?
There are a remarkable number of abuse cases that we've encountered, especially in Mexico, but also linked to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and those lines draw back to NSO.
Pegasus allows governments to extend the reach of their surveillance operations to any cell phone, anywhere. Since the spring of 2018, at least 3 Saudi dissidents living in exile in Canada and the UK were targeted with Pegasus. We went to meet one of them.
In living in London, did you feel like you were beyond the reach of Saudi Arabia? You were now safe?
I don't think anybody's safe completely, but it's safer than to be in Saudi Arabia.
Yahya Assiri runs a Saudi human rights organization from London, where he's lived in exile since 2014.
Can you tell me why electronic communications are so important for what you do?
There's no independent institutions at all inside the country. So nobody can document the violations inside the country. People working with the government in the courts, in the prisons, they forward information to us through the cell phones and through the internet.
What kind of risks did they take to get you that information?
They have been tortured and ill-treated and faced the sexual harassment just because they contacted myself or another NGOs, and because they told the world about the violations inside the country. All of that came from the surveillance on their mobiles.
The information Asiri collects from inside the country often makes it into international news. He sometimes worked with the slain Saudi journalist, Jamal Khashoggi.
It was the peak of Arab people power, and everybody was listening to them.
If he wanted to write an article, sometimes he asked me about some suggestions or asked about some information.
The two often spoke to each other over encrypted chat apps. In their final exchange, just days before his murder at the Saudi consulate in Turkey in 2018, Khashoggi proposed that they should try to pressure Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to release political prisoners.
And he said in his message, maybe you will feel it is silly or useless, but please let's try. Maybe we can awake his conscience. And that's Jamal. He's not enemy for anyone. He was trying to get reform. He was trying... Sorry.
The Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported that the Saudis paid $55 million for Pegasus in July 2017, just before Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman began to purge his opponents. Since then, more than 500 people have been detained, and a new anti-terror law made insults to the crown an offense. NSO denies its technology was used to target Khashoggi and refuses to divulge who their clients are. NSO says that Pegasus can only be used against high-level criminals like cartel members, terrorists, human traffickers, and if it's used otherwise, it can be shut off at the source. How do you reconcile that with what you know?
Saudi Arabia, when they are talking about Terror Act, they are talking about the freedom of speech. Criticizing the king or the crown prince and criticizing their justice. This is Terror Act. If we are trying to push the government to allow women to drive the car, this is Terror Act. So the Saudi government and NSO Group, they agreed together to fight our freedom in the name of fighting the terror.
NSO Group was started almost a decade ago by two Israeli tech entrepreneurs, Shalev Julio and Omri Levy. They're one of many successful companies in the fast-growing $12 billion mobile surveillance industry. Today, the company is worth almost $1 billion, despite the negative press. We asked NSO Group about the process they use to vet their customers. They said that they have an ethics committee that's empowered to block sales to potential customers without regard to commercial interests. They also say that committee turned down more than $150 million in sales in the last 3 years. NSO was recently asked about their practices by the U.S. show 60 Minutes.
Can you say that you won't and haven't sold Pegasus to a country that is known to violate human rights and imprison journalists and go after activists?
I only say that we are selling Pegasus in order to prevent crime and terror.
There's currently no evidence that NSO Group has licensed Pegasus to the U.S. government, but it appears to be interested in doing so. Its American-based subsidiary has registered as a federal contractor, a crucial step to doing business with the U.S. And according to a Vice report, NSO's co-founder, Omri Levy, demonstrated the company's technology to the Drug Enforcement Administration in 2015. NSO Group declined our repeated requests for an on-camera interview, so we went to Omri Levy's home outside of Manhattan.
see if Omri's home. Here he is. Omri, can we ask you a few questions?
Who are you?
Hey, I'm a journalist with Al Jazeera, Josh Rushing, a show called Fault Lines. Can we ask you just a few questions?
No.
Want to get a statement from you?
Excuse me, this is private property, so I would ask you kindly to go away.
Just one statement, like, why do you continue to sell to governments that use Pegasus to target human rights activists and journalists?
Go away, I'll call the police.
Say, go away or I'll call the police. How has NSO responded to your research?
NSO continues to call our reporting into question, call our evidence-based, data-driven reporting into question, but never bringing data or evidence to the table themselves. And so the evidence stands for itself.
And with you, they've actually gone a little bit beyond the keyboard, right?
Well, we don't know who's behind this, but we do know that my colleague Bahar and myself were both approached by individuals under false pretenses. We felt that that indicated that they were thinking, well, we can discredit these people. Maybe we can make this problem go away.
In January, Scott Railton was contacted by someone claiming to be a French businessman interested in his work and invited him to meet in New York City.
J'ai pris connaissance de votre travail et j'aimerais en discuter avec vous pour voir où est-ce qu'on pourrait éventuellement l'appliquer.
And it was only because we were so ready for something like that to happen that we were able to deploy and do this operation.
Suspecting it was a setup, Scott Railton prepared a sting of his own.
This is the thing, he controlled the operational environment. So I had to make a determination about where he was most likely to sit me.
He would go to dinner with the operative.
Back in the corner. I have to come in looking like the most wide-eyed PhD student.
And at the end of it, two reporters with the Associated Press would come in asking questions.
For the first hour, this just seems like a normal conversation. And it was like, finally, right at hour one, the yellow cards come out. And now he's asking me about Citizen Lab and the red cards. And it's like, are you an anti-Semite? He was interested in, I think, two things. First, he wanted to get me to say things that would make Citizen Lab and myself appear to be less credible, maybe even racist, which is pretty distasteful. And second, he wanted to talk to me about our work on NSO Group.
Specifically, NSO Group.
That's right. Now, when we got the AP guy to come up, Raphael Satter, sat down next to him.
I'd like to speak to you about your company, CPW Consulting.
You don't have to speak with you.
Excuse me?
I don't have to speak with you.
Well, actually, I think you'll want to, because my colleague was visiting your company this morning, and, it's very strange. She says it doesn't exist.
I know what I'm doing.
What are you doing? This was the...
It's only because we got his face splashed everywhere that he was identified. And I don't think that they're accustomed to being busted.
Do you work for Black Cube? No. Can I get the video?
Yes, the will is coming now. What about the NSO Group?
The New York Times later confirmed that the man was an operative for an Israeli private security company called Black Cube.
Maybe we know who you're working for.
NSO denies it sent a Black Cube operative to target Scott Railton.
The issue here is not about whether or not the industry should exist. The issue is, here's an industry, and wherever we scratch, and wherever other investigators scratch, we find abuses. Something is clearly wrong with the business model and the business as usual of this industry, and that's what we're here to talk about.
You can't see it, but there are wars being fought in cyberspace. The weapons are getting more sophisticated and easier to use. Unlike conventional or nuclear weapons, there is currently no international framework governing the use of cyber weapons.
The targeting of these high-risk people should be understood as canaries in the digital coal mine. We're sort of in the early days for the proliferation of this kind of technology. And when this technology goes to a place where there's not good oversight, the temptation is clearly overwhelming to use it in ways that extend beyond crime fighting.
Is it a case that the law just hasn't caught up with this technology?
I mean, even our society hasn't really caught up with our technology, right?
Dealers like NSO Group are profiting in the early, unregulated years of this new battlefield. And their clients are able to wield these surveillance weapons with impunity.
There's the layer of invasion of privacy that happens when the actual invasion takes place. But it's a whole nother kettle of fish when you discover that you've been violated in this way. This exposure of your personal world doesn't just stop at you, it extends out to the people you care about, who've trusted you, and it makes you toxic.
Yo no soy una criminal y quiero pensar que el resto de las personas que también fueron infectadas tampoco son criminales. Tiene que haber señales de que esto no debe estar ocurriendo y se tiene que castigar a quienes lo hicieron.